Assalamu alaikum. Was there an audio issue? Okay. Assalamu alaikum. Can someone confirm to me whether they were hearing me? Because all of a sudden everybody disconnected and then it said I was muted. I didn't put on the mute. Can everybody hear me? Assalamu alaikum. Can everybody hear me? Okay, so I'm gonna start over then, inshallah. Okay. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين آمين اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد الفاتح لما أغلق والخاتم لما سبق ناصر الحق بالحق والهادي إلى صراطك المستقيم وعلى آله حق قدره ومقداره العظيم اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما تعلمنا وزدنا من فضلك علما وتعليما إنك على كل شيء قدير ربنا آتنا من لدنك رحمة وهيئ لنا من أمرنا رشدا يا همة الشيخ اهدنا بهذا المنطق ولا تعطينا بنظر فأعطينا بالتقوى بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. So we're gonna backtrack inshallah. I had skipped a section. It was subconscious and conscious at the same time. I didn't mention that I was going to skip the section because this section that we're going to do today is related to the next section that we're going to do. We're probably not going to get to all of this section today, but we will. We'll get to the next part next week. And then there's another section. Each of these are dealing with Allah, His creation, His knowledge, and His will, and what that means for us. And so Imam al-Tahawi says, خلق الخلق بعلمه وقدر لهم أقدارا وضرب لهم آجالا ولم يخفى عليه شيء قبل أن يخلقهم وعلم ما هم عاملون قبل أن يخلقهم وأمرهم بطاعته ونهاهم عن معصيته وكل شيء يجري بتقديره ومشيئته ومشيئته تنفذ لا مشيئة للعباد إلا ما شاء لهم فما شاء لهم كان وما لم يشاء لم يكن يهدي من يشاء ويعصم ويعافي فضلا ويذل من يشاء ويخذله ويبتلي عدلا وكلهم يتقلبون في مشيئته بين فضله وعدله وهو متعال عن الأداد والأنداد ولا راد لقضائه ولا مؤقب لحكمه ولا غالب لأمره آمنا بذلك كله وأيقنا أن كلا من عنده. So he says he created all creation with his knowledge, and he decreed for them predestined matters, and he assigned to them appointed terms. Nothing was hidden from him before he created them. He knew what they would do before creating them. Yet he commanded them to obey him and forbade them to disobey him. Nevertheless, everything flows according to his decree and his will. His will is always enacted. His servants have no will except that which he has willed for them. Whatever he has not willed will not come to pass. Whatever he has willed will come to for them will come to pass, and whatever he has not willed will not come to pass. He guides whomever he wills, protects them, and grants them well-being out of his grace. And he allows whomever he wills to stray, humiliating and afflicting them out of his justice. Each of them is turned in his will between his grace and his justice. He is far exalted above having opposites or equals. There is no one to reject his decree, nor is there anyone to criticize his decision, and no one can overcome his command. We believe in all of that, and we are certain that everything is from him. And so the summary of this section is that we are to believe with certainty that Allah has decreed all things, good and evil, whether we consider it good or bad, or all things that we consider beautiful or ugly has been decreed by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala from before he created the creation. And nothing passes except that it is according to his decree. And that, and that everything that happens in the world, it is all according to his decree. The second thing is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and this is where our responsibility comes in, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has, in addition to decreeing all things, he charged us with obeying him. He has commanded us to obey him, and he forbade us to disobey him. So he does not, he made us responsible for obeying his commands. And so Allah, he created all creation with his knowledge. So what is creation? Creation is everything apart from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But what is it? It's everything that every possible thing or every contingent thing that has been brought from the realm of non-existence to existence. That's creation. And that includes everything apart from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so this particular passage is an allusion to the omnipotence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So creation happens through Allah's power. That when his will is connected to something's existence or occurrence, his power brings it into being. And that's where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says he has but when he wills something to say to it, be, and it is. And so this kalima be, this is not, the scholars say it's not an actual word be, but it's a metaphor for Allah's creative act. And so when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants something, he just wills it, and because he is all powerful, it becomes, at the moment that he wills it. And nothing can resist the power of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so everything that he wills to come into existence will come into existence. And everything that he wills not to come into existence will not come into existence. And so he also said, with his knowledge. And so the scholars say that knowledge is a prerequisite for creation. Because for someone to create something, they must know everything about that thing that they have created. And so his knowledge precedes the creation. Now, when we do something, when we create something or when we make something, our act of creation and our knowledge are created. And so we have a previous knowledge based on what we want to create. And then we create that thing. And after we create that thing, then we know it more fully, meaning that we know its aspects and everything. We have a tasawwur, which is a conception of how it will be. And then we have knowledge after the fact of how it is. This is not how Allah's omniscience, his knowledge works. So Allah knew exactly how everything would be before bringing it to existence. And when he brought it into existence, in accordance with his knowledge, it was exactly the way that he knew it from beforehand, and his knowledge about it never changes. So Allah's knowledge is perfect. He knows without beginning or end to his knowledge. Allah does not learn or acquire knowledge. He knows simply by virtue of who he is. He knows because he is the Lord of all things. There's nothing that escapes his knowledge, and we're going to see a little bit more about his knowledge in the upcoming slides, inshallah. And his perfect knowledge encompasses every time, place, existing thing or non-existent thing, or possible and impossible things. And so his knowledge covers all of that. So with these two attributes, power and knowledge, we have mentioned all of the 13 attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that the Ash'aris and the Maturidis they mentioned. And so we mentioned that Allah is Qadim, so he exists without beginning, and that he is Baqin, that he exists without end. And so that came in the first part of the text. And then we also mentioned al-qiyam bi nafsihi, self-subsistence, that he needs nothing and everything is in need of him. And also we mentioned al-mukhalafatu lil-hawadith, that he is different to all contingent beings. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is different to all beings. Everything, like we put up the diagram early on, that Allah is in one category and the creation is in another category. And there's no similarity between the two. And and influence goes one way. Allah influences creation. Creation does not influence Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then we mentioned wahdaniyah at the first part of the text of Imam al-Tahawi says, we say, and he says that Allah is one and he has no partner. So he's mentioned all of these attributes, and he also mentioned knowledge, and he mentioned life, and he mentioned power, and he mentioned will, and he mentioned speech when we talked about the Quran. And in the first section, he mentioned hearing and sight. There's nothing whatsoever like him, and he is the all-hearing, the all-seeing. And so those are the 13 attributes. The only attribute that Imam al-Tahawi did not mention is existence. And that is because Imam al-Tahawi was dealing with groups who acknowledged the existence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so there was no need for him to resort to proving Allah's existence. And then Imam al-Tahawi says, and he decreed for them predestined matters, and he assigned to them appointed terms. Nothing was hidden from him before he created them. He knew what they would do before creating them. Yet he commanded them to obey him and forbade them to disobey him. So this is a declaration of the fact that that everything occurs in the world, is by Allah's predestination. And so nothing occurs, not an atom moves, not a leaf falls, none of this occurs except that Allah both knew it and willed it. He knew it and he willed it, and his will what he willed it according to what he knew about it previously. And so the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam would say that the ink, the pen has been lifted and the ink has dried. Nothing that will occur in creation has been omitted from Allah's will. And Abu Hanifa was asked about Qadr, and he said Allah has clarified that. And then he recited, indeed, we created each thing with predestination, meaning that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala himself confirms that there's predestination. He confirms the divine will and the destiny. And so Qadr is to delineate everything good or evil that will occur to each thing and what it will have of reward or punishment. So this is the definition that the Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah give, that it is to delineate everything good or evil that will occur to each thing and what it will have a reward or punishment. Now, this is a direct refutation of the Mu'tazila. The Mu'tazila, as we will see later on, they actually said, for example, that if murdering somebody takes away from the life that they were supposed to live. And this is kufr. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he decreed the lengths of everybody's life. And they said that Allah was obligated to will good, and that, his willing evil or his willing bad things, or he's willing willing that which is ugly, is not applicable to him. And so this is a refutation of that, and is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has decreed all things. It doesn't matter if it's good, bad, doesn't matter if it's ugly or beautiful. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has willed it. And so he also said, and he appointed terms for them. And so an appointed time has been assigned to each and every created being, and that term is conclusive and decisive, meaning that you can't change it. The moment that you will leave this world was decided before you even came into this world. And so that has been decided. What we have to decide is how we want to leave this world. How we want to leave this world. And so what we're going to see is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, his will is enacted on all things. And our will is bound within his will. And he has obligated us for us to make a choice. What is that choice? Do we want to obey Allah and enjoy eternal bliss, or do we want to disobey and either enjoy torment or suffer torment? That's the choice. That's the only choice that we have. And everything that is written for us is in accordance with that choice that Allah already knew we would make. And so the only thing, our life is determined, our risk, our sustenance is determined, and risk includes the food we will eat, the things that we will use, like clothes and things like that, and our homes. It also includes knowledge, and it includes everything, every spiritual attainment and everything. All of that is risk. So these have been decided, and even our place in paradise or hell is already decided. But what concerns us in the moment is making that choice, whether we want to obey Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala or disobey him. And so Allah has said in the Quran, when their appointed term comes, they will not delay it an hour, nor will they hasten it. And he also said a decree determined in Ali Imran. And this decree determined has two meanings that the scholars have brought out. One is that it applies to there being an appointed time that will neither be delayed nor hastened. And it also applies to the recording of that appointed time in the guarded tablet. So those are the two meanings that the scholars have brought out regarding it. And then he says nothing was hidden from him before he created them. He knew what they would do before creating them. And so, in my question, here's a question for y'all. If Allah knew that someone would disobey them before he even created them, would disobey him before he even created them, can he be criticized for creating them and then allowing them to disobey him and be subject to his justice? And the answer to that is no. So if you have a teacher, for example, and he knows one student personally, and this student, he knows the student's parents, he knows their upbringing, he knows their character, he knows everything about them. If Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows everything about, if the teacher knows everything about a student, he knows their character, he knows their family, their upbringing, and everything. And when that student enters, he immediately knows this student is going to get an A. He's going to pass my class with excellence. And then there's another student who he knows inside and out, the same way that he knows the other student. And he knows as soon as the class begins, this student is not going to pass my class. If that teacher then goes about his business, teaching the normal way and not going out of his way to try and change the trajectory of each of these students, can the teacher be blamed? Or is he wrong? And we're not talking about the social implications. Obviously, socially, we expect teachers to do as much as they can to try and help students. That's not what we're discussing here. What we're discussing here is the principle of the matter. Is the teacher wrong if he just lets things flow how he knew they would go? And the answer is no. His prior knowledge does not make him responsible for what either of those students do. And so the acing of the student, the student that aced his class, he's not responsible for the student acing his class. And the student that failed his class, he's not responsible for the student failing his class. So this is with human beings. Now, the knowledge of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is an essential attribute that has no beginning. And no beginning or end means that Allah does not learn or acquire knowledge, nor does he lose it or forget it. So if Allah knows by virtue of who he is, everything about every creation before he creates it, and then he creates it and he wills it, and he wills its destiny according to his knowledge of his previous knowledge of it, then he is not to be blamed. You can only blame yourself. So when this attribute, the knowledge of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is absolute. And when this attribute is applied to known matters, it refers to uncovering of that thing or revealing of that thing and all matters related to it. And this applies to existing things and non-existent things. It applies to universals in particular. Universals in particulars are philosophical terms that the scholars of Kalam use to refer to universals are things that are conceptions of things with ihata, with encompassment. And so that a universal is to know the limits of something. And then a particular is to know a part of something without encompassment. And so it also applies to possible and impossible things. And nothing is hidden from Allah about any of these things at any moment. He has encompassed it all with his knowledge. So the important part for us is to understand that and believe all of that. And then what applies to us after that is, yet he commanded them to obey him and forbade them to disobey him. So our responsibility with the qadr of Allah is to believe with certainty that Allah has decreed every matter from beginning of creation. It is not our responsibility to know the nature of this decree or how it works with us. And our responsibility is to obey him and to avoid disobeying him. That's our responsibility. And where do we get this from? The hadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, where he said, he said to the companions, not one of you, there's not one of you except that his place in paradise or hell has already been written. And so the companion said, "O Messenger of Allah, should we not just depend on that then?" And he said, "No, you must act, and each will be facilitated to that for which he was created." And what this means is that your responsibility is not to delve into that. Your responsibility is to act. Allah created you to worship him. Allah created you to be subject to his command and his prohibition, and to be subject to the consequences or the rewards. And so your responsibility is not to know why Allah willed something or how Allah willed something. Your responsibility is to act and to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and to serve him. And so one of the things that my teacher and Tahawiyah actually mentioned at this junction is that this is not something where Allah is going to take somebody who has served him all of their life and devoted their lives to him and try to be righteous and just forget all of that and throw them into hell. Now this is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has decreed where everybody will go, and the signs of where they will go or the signs of where you will go, or the signs of where anyone will go, is in their actions. And so the only thing that the other hadiths that mention that somebody will do the acts of the people of paradise until there's only a small amount of space between him and it, and then the decree will overtake him and he will do the acts of the people of hellfire and vice versa. The only thing that those hadiths are saying is not saying that Allah is just going to take somebody and just throw them into hell when they've spent their whole life devoted to him. The only thing that those hadiths are saying is that we can't judge where someone is going in an absolute manner through their actions alone, because we don't know why they're doing their actions. And so the person who does the actions to paradise and then ends up in hellfire is somebody that was not doing the actions of the people of paradise sincerely. He was doing it for some other reason. He was hypocritical or anything else. And the person that does the actions of the people of hellfire and then goes to paradise after the decree overtakes him is somebody who had the intention of serving Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but he was weak. So he was a weak believer. And so Allah, the decree of Allah to where he goes overtook him. And then the other person was somebody who was hypocritical, and they were only a believer outwardly. And so that the thing is that we must serve Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and being facilitated to good works and being facilitated to self criticism and self-assessment are the signs of being of the people of paradise. And the being facilitated or having being facilitated to good acts, but not having any self-assessment is a sign that we're on the wrong path. And so what is the upshot is that we have the responsibility to obey Allah. And that should be our main concern, is obeying Allah, serving Allah, being devoted to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Our concern should not be understanding the qadr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but we must believe in it and have certainty in it. And so another hadith that you have is a person came to, I believe it was first to Ibn Umar. And he said, I have some doubts about qadr. And Ibn Umar radiallahu anhu, he basically said, you must believe that Allah has decreed everything that will happen before he ever created. And you must believe that nothing will hit you except that Allah had willed it, and nothing will miss you except that Allah had willed it. And what will hit you will never miss you, and what will miss you will never hit you. And you must believe that everybody who will be in paradise has already been decreed, and their number is not increased. And you must believe that whoever is in hell, they have already been decreed, and their number is not increased or decreased. And so he said all of this, and then he said, if you get to the day of judgment believing other than this, then you will be of the people of the fire. And then he said, I went to another companion, and I think it was Ibn Mas'ud, and he told me the same thing. And then I came to another companion, and he told me the same thing. And that companion narrated it from the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And so that this is Ibn Umar telling somebody, look, you have to believe in the qadr, that the qadr is true, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has determined all things, that Allah has willed all things. This is absolutely necessary for you to believe. And your responsibility is to believe that, and then to serve, and then to obey Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's the responsibility of the people that are morally responsible. So are there any questions before we continue? Okay, if you have questions, you can type it in the chat, inshallah. And then he says, nevertheless, everything flows according to his decree and his will. His will is always enacted. His servants have no will except that which he has willed for them. Whatever he has willed will come to pass. Whatever he has not willed will not come to pass. And so the divine will, Allah's will, is eternal and independent. Nothing affects it, and nothing can reject it. Everything that occurs in this world is through his willing it, creating it, and enacting his decree upon it, be it good or evil, beautiful or ugly, substance or accidents. A substance is something with a real form or a real body, and accident is an attribute or something that occurs to that substance. And his will is enacted on everything without any restriction. Human beings and jinn, on the other hand, we have limited bound will. And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, you will not will except that Allah, the Lord of the world, wills. And so did Allah will? His will was that we make a choice. When did we make that choice? With our choice to believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala or not believe in him. We made that choice when we declared that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was our Lord, when Allah brought us forth and made us bear witness that he was our Lord. And on that day, some of us made the intention to confirm that testimony when we came into this life, and some of us turned away. And so Allah he willed that we make a choice. He willed that we make a choice. And when we obey or disobey him with our action, we are all aware of our choice. So the thing about this is that this does not imply jabr. It does not imply that Allah is forcing people, because we are all aware that we choose our actions. We're aware of our will and our choice. We don't know exactly how it works. We don't know exactly how it works. It's something innate in us, but we are aware. When we make a choice, we are aware of that choice. And so no one can say that Allah forced them. It is Allah's, it is our limited bound will that we make our choices. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, his will, he wills our actions. And so this brings us to the problem of evil. And this is a very common argument these days. You see it all over the place. You can just look up any entertainer or any famous atheist, and they make this argument that the existence of evil is proof that God does not exist. And this argument rests on the premise that the Mu'tazila put forth. And this is not, the Mu'tazila weren't the first to put this premise forth, but the Mu'tazila, they are proponents of this. And they say that God is obligated to do what is best for his servants. God is obligated to do what is best for his servants. And so the first thing is that for there to be an obligation, there has to be a right. For there to be an obligation, there has to be a right. And so, does creation have a right upon Allah? And this is a question for y'all. So if y'all can Answer that question to the best of your ability. Does creation have a right upon Allah? Okay. Why not? If you say that creation does not have a right upon Allah, why is that? Okay, the creation is an illusion. Allah is absolute. Okay, so that doesn't tell me um, why the creation doesn't have a right upon Allah. So on the YouTube channel, one of the attendees said, because we do not own Allah or even ourselves. So this is part of it, yes. So Allah owns everything. Allah owns us and even owns our being. And so what is owned does not have a right upon the owner. And so if something is absolutely owned, then it doesn't have any rights to begin with. So Allah may do whatever he wills with what he owns, which is all of creation. And so it's not necessarily that's the basis. Allah does not have to do anything for his creation, and they don't have any right upon him. So one of the things that we know, and we read in some of the ahzab of the awliya, is that if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala were to punish us, for all eternity, then we deserve it because he gets to decide that. And if he is merciful with us, then that is from his grace. Sometimes yes, anything you do is from the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't mean that it's necessarily in accordance with the hukum, with the legislation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So there's the will of Allah and there's the legislation of Allah. So the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it has to do with all creation, and it's independent of all creation. The legislation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it is the command of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to obey Allah. And so you doing something that is at odds with that, doing something that is at odds with the legislation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, whether that's out of nafs or anything else, that is the will of Allah, but it's against the legislation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So it will have consequences. So what we were saying is, so initially, nothing has a right over Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But owning something isn't the only way to have a right. So men have rights over their wives, and wives have rights over their husbands. Women have rights over their husbands. That doesn't mean that one or the other owns the other one. So husbands don't own their wives because of the right, and the wives don't own their husbands because of that right. So owning something is not the only way to have rights. So the answer is initially and in essence, nothing has a right over Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But Allah has legislated certain rights. And so of the rights that Allah has legislated is that if you obey Allah, believe in Allah and obey Him, then it is your right for Him to enter you into paradise. But that's a legislated right, and that's not a right that is intrinsic to you. So when it comes to what Allah wills, to whether it's good, evil, or anything like that, then nothing has a right over Allah such that He would have to do what He would have to will what that thing or that person wants. So we kind of have to separate here. So that the legislative rights are separate. And that goes for whether you are acting at odds with the legislation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala or not. All of that's separate. The will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allah owns us, and therefore He has the right to do with us whatever He wills. And we don't have any say. And so Allah is not obligated to do what is best for His servants because He owns us absolutely. The servant is from ubudiyya, which is the complete subjugation of the slave to the one he serves. So it's complete subjugation, meaning that we don't have rights over Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So the slave owns nothing, not even his own self. And the one that owns something can do whatever he wills with it. So Allah, the creator of all things, is the owner of creation, and He can do whatever He wills with it, and He is not to be blamed. So if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created us and subjected us to eternal torment from the time we were created and for eternity, Allah would be just. But that's not how He created. And that's not that. And even though there's suffering in the world, there is also mercy in the world. There is also mercy in the world. We can't, the existence of suffering shouldn't make us deny the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so the problem of evil can be rejected by Allah is the owner of everything, and He can do whatever He wills with it. Another way that you can reject this argument of the problem of evil is that it rests on the idea that whatever occurs in this world, in this physical world, meaning this world in a dunya, is the be all and end all of matters. And so this world is not the purpose. And so whatever Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has willed, He is just. And suffering in this world does not necessarily mean that it's not eternal suffering. And so this world will end. And the purpose of this world is not to be a utopia. Is not to be paradise. Is not to be paradise. So if the purpose of this world is not to be paradise, then this idea that suffering is somehow objectionable is only based on the idea that it should be paradise. And since this world was not meant to be paradise, then that argument doesn't make sense. So those are two ways that we can reject the problem of evil. We'll get more into it. We're gonna go over, inshallah, the Kharida al-Bahiyya, and we'll deal with it more in detail. But basically, is Allah owns everything. So the basic summary is you either obey Allah and you obtain what he has promised those who obey him, or disobey him. The choice is yours. It's not everything that happens is going to occur. It doesn't matter if it's, good, bad, whatever, suffering, or hey, it doesn't matter if it's suffering or anything else. It's going to occur. That has nothing to do with you. It's not your responsibility to change any of that. Your responsibility is, are you going to obey Allah, or are you going to disobey him? You can be mad about suffering and disobey Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and go to where he has threatened to place the people that disobey him. Or you can obey Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and obtain what he has promised. And so that's the summary, inshallah. Are there any questions?
I have a question, Imam, but I just don't know how to formulate the question. Because this is a very,
you always bring me the good questions.
mashallah, because this is a very, very tough subject. Yeah, it's a very tough subject.
Yeah. So what is just ask the question the way it comes to you, inshallah.
It's the suffering that an individual receives, or the suffering that we receive in this world, is already destined to be. So is that suffering mitigated by our submission to Allah, or that suffering is still in and of itself a part of our submission to Allah?
Okay, it's not mitigated by our submission to Allah. It's going to occur anyway. So the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, "What will hit you will never miss you, or will never have missed you, and what will miss you will never have hit you." And so every single thing, he also said, if all human beings that have ever existed from the beginning of time, and all human beings and jinn that have ever existed from the beginning of time until the day of judgment, were to be gathered in one place, and they were all to try and make something happen that Allah has not willed to happen, it would not happen. And if they were to come together and try to make something not happen that Allah has willed to happen, it would still happen. And if they were to come together and try to benefit you with something that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has not willed for you, then they would not be able to do that. And if they were to come together and try to harm you with something that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has not willed, then they would not be able to harm you. So the idea is that everything that will occur to us in this life has been willed by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Our submission to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not change what has been willed to occur to us. And so for us, this should be a type of spiritual repose. What does that mean? It means that it should cause us to be relieved that we don't have to try and change all these things. Yes, there are times when we should be active. We should try to change what, we have the decree or the legislation to try and change what is evil with your hands and stuff like that. There are times, there's a time for that. But what I mean by we should be relieved is that none of this stuff is in our control. What is in our control is for us to obey Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala or disobey Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so in every situation, Allah has told us how he wants us to act. So you see the will behind everything, for Allah's will behind everything. You see that. And then you act according to how he has told you. And so when afflictions happen, what has he told you? Be patient. Be thankful. When good things happen, be thankful and rejoice, praise Allah, and offer servitude. This is how he has told you to approach everything. When the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he said, if one of you is planting a tree and the day of judgment comes upon him, he should continue planting his tree. What does that mean for us? That means that your concern is not what Allah is doing with his world, but doing what Allah has put you on here to do. And when we say that your concern is not what Allah is doing to this world, your being, your body, your soul, your mind, all of that is part of this world. And so what Allah does with it is not your concern. What Allah has commanded you to do in the face of what is going on is your concern. And so for example, this does not mean that you don't try to change things, change what is obviously unlawful. So if you see somebody being wronged, you have to stand up for the person that's being wronged. But that person being wronged was already decreed, but Allah told you how to react to that situation. And so when you react in the right way, then there's a reward.
Interesting.
I mean, if you have further doubts or questions, go ahead.
I understand. I understood what you said earlier, where you said that the believer's position is to be in a sense of repose or a sense of surrender to whatever occurs in his life. How does our expectation, because there's another hadith in English that I understand as Allah is as we expect him to be.
Okay, so in general, so what that hadith means is that if somebody expects good from Allah, then he will have good from Allah. If someone expects, evil from Allah, then that's what he will have from Allah. But this is not me referring to, this is a universal principle that's not referring to particular matters. So, for example, the Prophet ﷺ said, everything about the affair of the believer is good. Now, a disbeliever or somebody who has doubts, they'll say, well, how can you say that when, I lost my house? Okay, if you're a believer and you lose your house and you're patient and you work, to continue to support your family in the best way you can, and you're patient with Allah has brought, has willed for you, then that's good for you. And so your expectation didn't mean that you're not going to lose your house, but it means that ultimately that thing that occurred to you is going to be good. Maybe not now. And there are many things that occur to us that we deem as bad, but they're actually good. And there are many things that occur to us that we deem as good, and they're actually bad. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, and you may hate a thing, and it is actually good for you. And you may love a thing, which is actually it's actually evil for you, or is bad for you. And so we don't know what is ultimately good and what is ultimately bad. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in his perfect knowledge and wisdom knows what is ultimately good and what is ultimately bad. So our expectation of good from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala should not be affected by temporary setbacks or temporary afflictions that have an end, because ultimately our expectation of good from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is a sum total of what we want from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that is that on the day of judgment, we meet with his pardon and his forgiveness, and we're granted paradise. And so if you have a good expectation from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will grant you paradise. It doesn't mean that you're not going to go through things in this life. And actually, the people of paradise will go through more things in this life than anybody else. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam also said that, sallallahu alaihi wasallam also said that, paradise has been veiled, with afflictions. And it says, the word is al-makarih. Al-makarih. Al-makarih are things that you hate, or things that you dislike, or things that make you uncomfortable. And so, that and hell has been veiled with ease. And so there are many things that, seem good or seem bad in this life, and they're actually the opposite. And only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows this reality.
Alhamdulillah. Excellent, Imam.
Alhamdulillah. Okay. If there are no other questions, inshallah, we'll see each other next week. We'll go over the next part of this section. And there are two sections on, as I mentioned at the beginning of the class, there are two sections that we're going to be doing on the qadar and qada of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the predestination and the decrees of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so we'll be going over this and gaining more understanding, inshallah. وصلى الله تعالى على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. سبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون وسلام على المرسلين والحمد لله رب العالمين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi ta'ala